Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. So today was day 12 of spoiler season for the Scourge League, and there's a whole lot of stuff that was dropped in one massive information dump today. We got all the information about the Scourge League, and amongst that, they also put out the entire preliminary patch notes for the league. There's going to be a couple of changes to these, but these should mostly be finalised, and there's a couple of things in there that are easy to miss. I already made a video, link in the description below, to some of the changes to boss uniques that had me excited. But I wanted to talk about some of the changes that are being made to Quivers. So specifically, this is about rare Quivers and some of the mods that you can craft on them. So if we have a look at desirable rare Quivers at the moment, and this is specifically for elemental attack bows. So there are other types of Quivers people want for builds like Toxic Rain and the like, but we're going to focus on the ones for builds like Elemental Hit or Lightning Arrow or Ice Shot. They all pretty much use very similar Quivers. And the sorts of Quivers that you're looking at are three specific mods together, three of the same prefixes everywhere. The first prefix, and this one's not negotiable, it's so much better than any alternative, bow attacks fire an additional arrow. This is a Shaper exclusive mod, and so people almost always use Shaper Quivers. The second mod is Life. You'll see that this particular Quiver here has tier 2, but there are other ones with other tiers on them. And then the third mod is elemental damage with attack skills. Now, there is an excellent guide as to how to craft these Quivers that was put out by streamer Elesshar, which I will link in the description below. But fundamentally, the key trick is roll the Quiver via any means to get bow attacks fire an additional arrow on a rare Quiver. Once you've got it, add elemental damage to attack skills or life via any crafting means, including the crafting bench. Then use the harvest craft that reforges an item much more likely to keep the same mods. That will remove the crafted tier and replace it with a permanent tier. And then at that point, you craft on the other one. Sometimes you'll brick this, like sometimes the craft will fail, but usually it'll work. And then you keep on using the reforge an item with mostly the same type of mods until you end up with good tiers of the two tiered mods. And that can get you a Quiver with three excellent prefixes on the base of your choice. And then after that, there's a number of ways you can work on the suffixes if you are willing to invest a lot of currency. If you're not, you can just use it as is. You know, something like this Raptor Quill Quiver is perfectly good and would be perfectly good for beating all content in the game. So that's the current meta. And the key thing that's so important here is that there are only three prefixes worth considering. There's nothing else that can compete with these prefixes at the moment for most builds that are doing elemental damage with their Quivers or with their bow attacks. So what's changing is that the added flat damage to attack modifiers on Quivers have been terrible for a long time. These are getting enormous buffs. These are getting raised to the sorts of numbers that can allow them to actually compete with some of these other mods. So do think that the Shaper mod is still so good that you're probably always going to use it, but you then have the opportunity of replacing elemental damage percent with attacks. Maybe on your build, maybe once you hit a certain gearing level, you would prefer to have more flat damage, more base damage. Or alternately, maybe you don't care about having life. Maybe you don't care about being tanky. You're quite willing to go without that extra life on your Quiver in order to just get more damage. So this is going to add a lot of flexibility. So what specifically is changing? The highest tier modifiers that are being added will add an amount of flat damage that is approximately half what the top tier modifiers would add to a bow. So that's a considerable chunk of flat damage. It's like getting the unique chest piece Hari's Ire, which adds a lot of flat damage to your bow attacks. And it also will now allow Quivers to share the same modifier progression for added physical damage to attacks as amulets currently have. So no longer will all of these flat damage to attack rolls cap at level 28. So what's this going to mean for people at craft Quivers? Actually, Elesshar's methods, to the best of my knowledge, will still work. They'll still work just as well as they always had. The thing is that now there'll be a few other desirable results you could hit along the way. So let's say, for instance, that you used Chaos Orbs on a Shaper Influence Quiver, and the first one that you got that seemed good had bow attacks fire an additional arrow, it had a low tier of life, and it adds fire damage, flat fire damage. At that point, you might decide, all right, I'm not going to try to annul off that fire damage like you would do if you're following Elesshar's method normally. I am instead just going to try and harvest Reforge, much more likely to get the same mods, until that fire damage mod hits a decent tier. One thing I will add though as a caveat is that at least on weapons, and we don't have any hard information on this for Quivers yet, there is a strong bias against rolling the top tiers of flat damage mods. So mods like crystallizing and carbonizing and vaporizing are the top tiers of top and second top tiers of damage to flat damage, elemental damage to attacks. These sorts of mods are actually much rarer than the low tiers. That's not the case with the elemental damage with attack skills. So devastating is the same probability as overpowering. Overpowering is the same probability as the bottom tier one. Likewise for life, athletes is the same probability as fecund, I think it is, that's the top tier, or as the lower tiers like hail. So what this is going to do is just create more options for crafting good quivers. It should still be, one of the things the patch notes goes out of its way to say, is it should still be about as hard to roll the existing good mods as it currently is. Last things are that there are a couple of similar mods that are being changed that are essence generated. So essences of anguish, suffering, torment, contempt, and envy will have their flat damage raised to these new levels. And additionally, there is a quiver option. There is a quiver option for corrupted essences. So this is from the Essence of Horror. And it's also available on the Elder Quivers as well. These are not used very often, but they add cold damage per frenzy charge. This is getting a considerable buff in numbers and might actually be good enough to use. So that's all I got on Quivers. A number of interesting changes there. I thought that this would be something a bit more niche, but I wanted to get some discussion out there about just little parts of these manifestos, or this, not manifesto, of the patch notes that excited me. My plans are to go through everything on stream probably tonight my time, or maybe tomorrow, and just have an extensive discussion with people. So that is something to look forward to if you're interested. Anyways, may your Varlorbs have interesting results, and do use them. Do use Varlorbs on these sorts of quivers, because you can get some truly magnificent hits with them.